All right, we're actually going to make an edit in the middle of a program, but we had requested a couple local elected officials to come and speak, and we ended up getting the district representative, Edward Feves, from Senator Ben Allen's office to come speak about some of the climate work happening in the legislature. So, welcome.
We'll multitask. And if I need to sit down, then I will. So hello everyone, my name is Edward Feves. I am a district representative for State Senator Ben Allen. He covers pretty much all of the South Bay and this area, but our district ranges from Malibu at the farthest north to San Pedro at the farthest south effectively. Then we go inland, we cover about 1 million people. Senator Allen is pretty big on pretty much all things environmental. It's one of his leading pillars as a member of the California State Legislature. So I have a number of bills that we're working on this session that are all tied into the environment, as well as some that we've worked on in previous sessions that are all climate and climate adjacent. So you may remember on the ballot last year, or at least I hope you do, you saw a line item for something called Prop 4. Prop 4 was a $10 billion climate bond that essentially authorized the state to borrow money for a variety of environmental projects. And there were 8 different categories in it, so I'm not going to go through all of them and go give you the specific dollar amount in each. But generally speaking, the projects that were encompassed by Prop 4 were projects like wildfire and drought mitigation programs, programs to mitigate the risks that rise as a result of increasing climate change and increasing global temperatures. And that includes like building shade structures for our communities that are in the agricultural sector, or otherwise protecting natural land from the impacts of climate change. Among a whole host of others, right? One of the biggest pots of money in Prop 4 was all about mitigating the risk of wildfire. Clearly, at the beginning of this year, we could have used some of that, as we saw the devastating consequences of climate change, and especially as it exacerbated the risk of these massive fires. So Prop 4 aims to spread some resources throughout the entirety of the state of California to help mitigate some of those risks. Another one that we worked on previously is SB 54. This is the reason why you don't have a lot of single-use plastics anymore when you go get takeout. You don't get those polystyrene or styrofoam containers for takeout. You don't get those individually wrapped plastic utensils that are just awful for the environment. Because what ends up happening is, even if you throw those away, they frequently end up blowing out onto the street and then into our gutters and into our waterways and into our natural environment. And so SB 54 cracked down on that. Said, well, hold on a second. We have alternatives. We have green initiatives. Why don't we use those instead? And we took a whole aim at phasing out those single-use plastics. There's more to that story than just a simple writing a bill and getting it passed. But that is the intent of the bill, and it has rolled out pretty well so far. Moving into the current session, which is a 2-year process, we have 4 bills that are in the environmental section that I think are all pretty important for the likes of you. 2 of them we actually ran last year, and they passed in some capacity, but we wanted to expand them and make sure that they were more accurate to what we really wanted to accomplish. So the first one is, we call it SB 501, but it's our household hazardous waste producer responsibility. Right, so producer responsibility is essentially saying that if you manufacture or produce or sell anything that includes hazardous waste, you are responsible for that materials throughout its entire life cycle. And that life cycle component will matter more for that second bill I'm about to talk about. But specifically with household hazardous waste, typically that has fallen on local governments or community members to get rid of that waste in some capacity, right? And household hazardous waste ranges from paint cans to aerosol to, I had a garden project that I only used half a bottle of weed killer and now I can't use the rest of the weed killer, but that's hazardous waste, right? So instead of making it so that local governments were ultimately responsible for the disposal and the handling of that waste, what we instead changed that perspective to was, okay, hold on, producers, you are responsible for this. So, most of this is regulated through the Department of Toxic Substances Control. You'll hear that as DTSU way more often, and frankly, I don't expect you to remember the actual name of the agency involved. What this producer responsibility bill does is essentially says all of those you have to report to DTSC about how you are managing it, and then any funds that you accrue throughout the process of selling these products that have HHW is how we, anacronyms, whatever, how we shorten hazardous waste into a little bit more of a shorthand. We are now requiring producers to report on how those materials are being handled, and as well as fund the process for DTSC to handle and dispose of these properly and make sure that they end up in the right place instead of just ending up in your landfill, which at that point knows what's happening to it. Right. So when I talk about the other side of this, the producers having the responsibility throughout the entire life cycle of the product, right? And this matters a lot for our other bill that we ran last year, which was our electric vehicle battery recycling. The electric vehicle market in California is great. It does a lot to phase out fossil fuels. It does a lot to significantly improve the environment and the environment that we are existing in day out. However, in the production of those electric vehicles, we are mining very, very precious materials. We're talking lithium, we're talking cobalt, nickel, natural graphite, manganese, so much of the materials. And we know that these are not exactly the safest of materials, right? So rather than put this environmental strain over and over and over again as we continue to mine more materials from more batteries, instead, throughout the cycle of the battery, there are different times in which the battery may still have a use case, or at least the materials may still have a use case, but the vehicle does not, or vice versa. The vehicle still has a use case, but the battery is dead. And so at each stage along this process, somebody is responsible for the handling, for the repurposing, for the reuse or recycling of an electric battery. Now, if the battery still has a charge and it's still functional, great. Sell the battery back to car manufacturers, let them put it back into a new car, and get that right back on the market. But if the battery's not working, there's a hierarchy of steps that producers and those responsible for the handling of these batteries can take to make sure that the batteries get recycled, reused, otherwise repurposed in a way that doesn't just end up in a landfill, right? In the same capacity that I started this conversation talking about the Palisades fire, a ton of electric vehicles in both Palisades and in Altadena burned down. And the handling of these electric batteries is incredibly important to make sure that that waste is not then trickling back into our environment and causing undue health concerns moving forward. Those are the ones we ran in previous sessions, and we liked those bills. We thought they were good bills, so we ran them again. And we ran them again largely because they passed in some capacity, right? So our household hazardous waste bill essentially became a paint care bill, and we're looking to expand this to make sure that all of the protections that we had originally wrote into our HHW bill can then get pushed through and make sure that we're assessing all of the hazardous waste and not just, a paint can, an aerosol. We have a couple of new bills that we're equally as excited about, and I will run through both of them really quickly. So the first one is SB 682, and this is all about phasing out those PFAS, forever chemicals. I swear to God, I've given these legislative updates a number of times, and one of these days I'm going to actually remember how to pronounce the word that PFAS stands for. I'm not even going to try now because it's not worth my time, and honestly, you guys won't. It doesn't matter for the sake of this conversation. We in the state of California already know, and honestly not just the state of California, all across the US, we already know that these forever chemicals have a number of adverse health effects. And it doesn't take a lot, right? In as little a concentration as 1 drop of water in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools, that is enough to cause significant health concerns. And these health concerns range from cancers to immune suppressants to a whole litany of other issues, right? And so, if we know that this is the case, and we know that these health concerns arise from having forever chemicals, the next step in that logical process is, let's get rid of the forever chemicals. So what SB 682 does is it creates a 3-tier deadline for producers to remove that intentionally added PFAS from their products with the goal of phasing in alternatives. And the reason why there's a 3-tiered system is so that producers and manufacturers and these companies that are selling these products that have forever chemicals in them will have the time to introduce alternatives. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to this, right? And essentially there are 3 major exceptions to this. The first is, you can get a waiver if you can somehow prove that there is no alternative product available for the product that currently contains forever chemicals. Fine, if there's nothing currently available, until there is something available, let's talk about extending that responsibility. Number two, the function provided by these forever chemicals, if it is absolutely necessary to the product's function, then sure, you can keep it in there and you can get an exception until there is an alternative available. And I'm going to continue to stress until there is an alternative available, because the goal is to get rid of these forever chemicals as soon as possible. And the third one is all about, okay, there is an alternative available, it is necessary for the function of the product, but the inclusion of these forever chemicals is important to, and I'm going to read this verbatim, the health, safety, or functioning of society. Now that one's a much harder bar to clear, so the first two are the ones that really matter. But should a producer or manufacturer manage to prove that, hey, there is no alternative, or hey, the inclusion of these forever chemicals is necessary for the product to function, then we can extend that responsibility and you get a slightly delayed deadline for when you were supposed to phase those out, right? So there's three tiers. There's 2035 is the first one. 2027 is the first one, so a lot sooner than that. Then 2035, and then 2040. And the idea is that some of these products are going to take a little bit longer to phase out, create an alternative, right? So let's give the producers and manufacturers, our businesses, time to find that alternative and work with us in a way to get rid of these forever chemicals. The last one, this is the one that is very, very much exciting for me, is our Clean Water Protections Act. Now, basically, prior to 2023, so for 1948 onward, the federal government had a Water Pollution Control Act, essentially. Now that's got amended to the Clean Water Act in 1972, so it's changed names a couple of times, but essentially what this said was all of the waterways in the United States, and I do mean all of them, were protected from dumping of chemicals or other toxins or other waste without specified permits. Now, obviously, we don't want to have anything dumped into our waterways, but there has to be some wiggle room to work with this. And all of this was well and good up until May of 2023, when a Supreme Court case called Sackett versus the Environmental Protection Agency changed the game. What this new court case decided was that there are certain nexus waters, certain waterways and watersheds in the U.S. that don't qualify as waters of the United States, or WOTUS is my favorite acronym for it. Now this is really complicated because what constitutes an existing waterway? And the Supreme Court's decision essentially said that if it is not a permanent waterway, if it's a watershed or a tributary that is sometimes got water flowing into it, but not always, that's not considered a water of the United States, and therefore doesn't have the same protections as major rivers or major coastal waterways or anything along those lines. We know that that's not smart, that's not reasonable. Having some expectation of all waters in the United States are or should be protected means a lot for our environmental protection. So what SB 601, our Right to Clean Water Act, does is it takes all of those decisions that were in place pre-Sackett, and it says, okay, great, if you're not going to have them at the federal level, let's bring them down to the state level. And so it's going to be the exact same process as you would have previously had to undergo through the federal government, except this time it's handled by the state of California, and specifically the Water Resources Control Board. Let me make sure I have that right. Yep, Water Resources Control Board, to administer the permits. They were already administering the permits anyway because the way that the federal government has structured their Clean Water Act gave states the power to administer how those permits were metered out, how those permissions were allowed, and what the process for applying these looked like. So functionally, nothing really changes other than to say, okay, well, if it's not from the federal government anymore, it will be from the state government. There won't be a change in expenses or anything like that, or the process of applying for these permits, but we are making sure that those protections stay in place in a way that safeguards our waterways, from actions of future governments or future administrations. Now, what this looks like in practice doesn't really mean a lot for the average individual, but what it does mean in function is that it keeps protections in mind, it keeps our environmental processes moving forward so that we can continue in California to say, okay, hey look, These watersheds, these tributaries that feed into the Colorado River are actually important to us and the environment and the communities that they benefit. Our waterways feed millions of Americans, not just in California, but all over the western United States. These are important to us, that we make sure that we enshrine our environmental protections in that way. Clearly, the environmental protections are a big facet of Senator Allen's policy positions, and I'm happy to talk about them more at any future date. I have plenty of business cards if you'd like to discuss them with me. But that's the gist of our environmental bills that we're running this session. We're running four of them that we think are incredibly important. And I'm more than happy to continue discussion moving forward. Thank you.